We are going to move right into our last session, and speaking on the topic, the way forward, innovate or perish, is going to be Mr. John Wilson, Casey. I'm going to call him our return speaker. He was here last year as well and did an excellent job, and I'm sure there's going to be no different. We have no different expectation in terms of his presentation today. And so I'm going to call now on John, who's going to come and speak on the way forward, innovate or perish.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, all. I think firstly, given that I'm the last speaker, I wish to congratulate the AIBT conference team, Anastasia, Brodo, Perry, for putting on yet another successful Nassau conference. Our industry is indeed grateful for the leadership of AIBT, BFSB, and the other groups that spearhead our industry, because they're working against the odds, mind you, to keep our industry as current and relevant as it could be, notwithstanding the prevailing headwinds our industry has had to deal with for the past 10 to 15 years. Now, I suspect the reason the conference organizers slated me to speak in the late afternoon at the end of an information-heavy conference for 45 minutes is that they were hopeful that I would give some rousing, engaging, and riveting talk in order to keep you all awake until the closing remarks. Well, that's not going to happen. Simply because I don't know a lawyer who speaks for 45 minutes without being paid. So I will say to you, as King Henry VIII said to his sixth wife, I will not keep you very long. Fortunately, unlike a number of King Henry's wives, you are not at risk of losing your heads. While I will paint a somewhat bleak picture of our industry, I do not intend by this talk to suggest that our industry has indeed been decapitated. Although this was clearly the intention of the multifaceted attacks on our industry by the geopolitical forces which had amassed against us, however, the issue of losing one's head, while a somewhat macabre analogy, does raise a very poignant and relevant question that we as an industry need to answer. I pose this question: are we as an industry, given the way in which we market, manage, and execute our business, at risk of perishing? Can we remain a viable and sustainable industry and a major contributor to the economic life of the Bahamas, notwithstanding the global direction of today's financial services industry? Is our industry in a precipitous freefall and in danger of becoming extinct? A risk which has been accelerated by our dogged insistence on holding on to an outdated way of positioning our industry and conducting our business. Are we in dire need of innovation to ensure our survival? It would be no surprise to any of you, given the topic of my presentation this afternoon, what my view is. It is both of those questions with which we have to grapple. What does conventional wisdom tell us about when innovation is necessary? Whether in business, technology, or society, innovation is crucial to enable one to meet existential threats and to ensure growth, relevance, and advancement. It most often requires bold and courageous action and a break with the past. Now, I think you've seen Abraham Lincoln's picture up, so don't be afraid. We're still talking financial services. But in 1862, in his annual message to the US Congress, President Abraham Lincoln, realizing that his nation faced an existential threat if it did not purge itself of the pernicious vice of slavery, urged his nation to free itself from outdated thinking. I have taken from that epic address the following quote, which seems so apt to our present circumstance. President Lincoln said, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, we must act anew and think anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we will save our country." Now, I am by no means suggesting that the plight we in the industry face is in any way as momentous or as challenging as what President Lincoln was facing. Quite frankly, they are not even in the same universe. However, the underlying premise of his message is the same. Our past way of marketing and conducting and executing our business is inadequate to the stormy present. The challenges we as an industry face are piled high with difficulty, and we must rise to the occasion. As we face a new and different financial services landscape, we must free ourselves from the past way of doing business. If we innovate, we will save our industry. From the early 1990s, our offshore financial services sector has been a significant contributor to the GDP of the Bahamas. In 1989, the central bank reported that there were more than 400 licensed international banks and trust companies in the Bahamas, with combined balance sheets estimated in excess of $300 billion. This was supplemented by over 75,000 international business companies on our company's register. The future was bright. The sector, built during an era when secrecy and tax advantages were the main building blocks of international financial centers, including here in the Bahamas, was flourishing. Offshore jurisdictions were constantly trying to outcompete the other through enacting more facilitative laws designed to attract international wealth to their shores. To be honest, it was really a race to the bottom, as each jurisdiction was marketing their industries to the ultra-wealthy by promising as little oversight as possible, all the while assuring that their information will be kept secret. In the Bahamas, we were among the leaders in this effort, and our pole position was the catalyst for the exponential growth of a very vibrant and profitable industry. Like many other jurisdictions, especially in the Commonwealth Caribbean, the Bahamas enshrined in its statute laws a legal right to confidentiality. The old Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Act prioritized confidentiality of financial account information to the extent of criminalizing its breach. The Bahamian IBC Company, a pillar of the offshore architecture and the primary vehicle available for use by international persons into which their wealth was deposited, allowed beneficial owners to conceal their ownership interests, firstly through the existence of the bearer share regime, and subsequently by a system which limited the availability of information on the ownership of these companies. In addition to confidentiality, the second hallmark of our financial services industry was the fact that Bahamian law, under a well-settled common law principle, refused to enforce the tax laws of foreign jurisdictions. Financial institutions were able to rely on this rule of law to refuse to respond to requests from foreign tax authorities to disclose information on the accounts of their international clients. The Bahamian legal system, through our courts, provided the needed support to our financial services industry by robustly defending the client's right to confidentiality and validating the refusal to disclose client information to foreign tax authorities. Our jurisdiction and other IFCs operated under this protective shield well into the early 2000s, until, frustrated by the persistent lack of cooperation being provided by offshore jurisdictions, the onshore jurisdictions set about to dismantle the pillars upon which international financial centers were built. The attack started incrementally as onshore jurisdictions, eager to recapture lost tax revenue, began to utilize their unrivaled size, strength, and unity of purpose to begin chipping away at the bastions of our industry. The attacks began in earnest in 1998 with the publication of the OECD's 1998 report on harmful tax competition. The 1998 report identified 3 special features that characterized a tax haven: lack of effective exchange of information, lack of transparency, no requirements for substantial commercial activities. Through this report, the OECD sought to pressure OFCs to comply with the OECD's transparency initiatives through a process of naming and shaming those jurisdictions that they determined were engaged in harmful tax practices. In 2000, almost all offshore financial centers in the English-speaking Caribbean were blacklisted. Anxious to be delisted from this blacklist, the Bahamas and other OFCs reluctantly entered into bilateral tax information exchange agreements with onshore jurisdictions to cooperate on the exchange of information in relation to tax matters. It was this action that began the precipitous decline in the amount of new business for our financial services industry and spelled the death knell of the industry as we had previously come to know it. The results of these coordinated and targeted attacks on offshore financial centers began to show almost immediately. Slowly but surely, subsidiaries of international banks and trust companies began to bow to the pressure of their home-based tax authorities by either closing or consolidating their offshore operations in jurisdictions which were not considered as opaque as the traditional offshore centers, returning their operations to their home countries. By 2010, only 10 years after the advent of the TIEA regime, the number of commercial banks and trust companies had fallen from its peak of 400 in late 1999 to a mere 100 entities in 2010. This, of course, would have been accompanied by a correlative loss of employment jobs in the sector. Notwithstanding the obvious impact on international financial centers by the TIEA regime, from the OECD's perspective, it did not go far enough. To enable onshore jurisdictions to utilize the TIEA regime to seek the disclosure of relevant information, the onshore jurisdictions would have had to already be in possession of reliable evidence on tax evasion. The tax authorities in these jurisdictions were not allowed to undertake a roving inquiry to determine whether one of their citizens was in breach of their tax laws. We in the law refer to that exercise as fishing, and astute lawyers were able to move the court to strike out many of these requests on the grounds that they were indeed fishing exercises. At the very least, compliance with these requests were significantly delayed until the court process had played out. Thus, in 2010, the OECD published the first edition of its report on voluntary disclosure programs. It came 18 months after the G20 leaders had publicly declared that the end of the era of bank secrecy was upon us and called upon countries to implement the standard on the exchange of information on request. This clarion call from the G20 led us to the dreaded acronym of CRS, the Common Reporting Standard. And it followed another dreaded acronym, FATCA, the Foreign Accounts Transaction Compliance Act, which is the US version of automatic exchange of information. The steps towards the automatic disclosure of information ushered in the next steep decline of our industry. This is where we are today, with the number of international banks and trust companies having declined from 100 in 2010 to 54 in 2023. Employee numbers in the sector have also declined during this period, from just over 1,200 to approximately 625, a roughly 50% reduction. Bahamians constitute approximately 80% of the offshore sector workforce. And what is evident from the numbers is that as international banks leave or downsize, Bahamians are the most impacted as employment opportunities dim. Significantly, between 2017, when the Bahamas was first added to the EU blacklist, and 2000, Bahamian employment in the sector has contracted at an accelerated rate. A slew of additional initiatives have been forced upon the Bahamas and other IFCs to ensure that the three features identified in the OECD's 1998 report were being eliminated: requirement to maintain registers of beneficial owners, the prevention of base erosion and profit shifting practices through adherence to the inclusive framework, and we heard Gowen's panel discussing that earlier. Then came requirement for substantial economic activity in the jurisdiction, implemented via the inclusive framework on BEPS, which resulted in the passage of the CESRA legislation. Eliminating ring fencing by removing all preferential treatments conferred under various statutes like the International Business Companies Act, the Exempted Limited Partnership Act, the Investment Condominium Act, and the Executive Entities Act. The forced remodeling of our industry to which we have been subjected make it patently obvious, even to the uninitiated, that our industry, as it was originally conceived, is no longer viable. While we continue to service the legacy business, which remains as relics of the past glory days, this, in my view, is not a sustainable business model for the future of our industry. We must reimagine our financial services industry so that it is forward-thinking and forward-looking. Given that the original pillars of our industry are no longer a selling feature for us, we must ask ourselves, are we able to compete on an equal footing with the financial services industries of the onshore jurisdictions? Because that is what it will take if we are to at least survive. And we must surpass their service levels if we intend to thrive. When we go to the market to sell our industry, what will our differentiating factors be, which will allow us to stand out and stand apart from our competitors? What will be our value-added component? Now, I do not presume to know or have all the answers to these questions. And quite frankly, if I had them, you'd have to pay me to tell you. But these answers will require strategizing and brainstorming as an industry to address these questions. For my part, I think our industry must construct new pillars on which our industry must stand, in place of the two crumbled pillars of the past of secrecy and tax advantages. After all, there is only so much sun, sand, and sea one can sell to an ultra-high net individual. After a time, that feature alone becomes stale. I would suggest that those pillars ought to be, number one, high-quality service, and number two, creative product offerings. These are the two pillars, in my respectful view, on which we should construct our industry's future. As to quality of service, to be able to survive, we must, at a minimum, be able to meet international standards when it comes to providing our services. And to thrive, we must exceed those standards and provide high-quality service. Just getting by on the service matrix simply will not do. We must be known as a jurisdiction for providing exceptional service as our stock in trade. This involves not only attracting the right talent, but also developing and leveraging skills effectively. This will allow us to unlock the potential in our organizations, which is essential for driving innovation, achieving competitive advantage, and ensuring sustainable growth. Now, I know that the availability of talent in the Bahamas is a vexing problem, which our industry has contended with for some time. This problem begins and ends with our education system, to be honest. Posing the question of whether our education system is broken is a question we lawyers say is asked and answered. But drilling down into this problem would require far more time than I have been allotted for this presentation, and it is not my focus this afternoon. My detailed and considered thoughts on this issue will be left for another presentation in a different forum. However, as an industry, we have a vested interest in the Bahamian education system, and as such, we should ourselves come off the sidelines and provide some assistance to trying to resolve this vexing and intractable problem that we as a jurisdiction faces. We should do this not out of a sense of philanthropy, but because it is in our own best interest to ensure that there is an available pool of talented Bahamians to staff our organizations. We need to ask ourselves, what are we doing to contribute to this talent pool? Now, I'm sure that some of you are saying, well, this is not our problem, it's the government's problem. And that may very well be true. But in this room, there are people who represent extraordinary resources in business, capital, and technology. Whether it is within your own organization, or you are a private banker or trustee to individuals and families who own and control these resources. Because you and your organizations have a vested interest in ensuring that our education system can produce quality graduates, you should be leveraging these resources and engaging with the government to devise strategies to address the problem. Who knows? We may have in this room the ability to revolutionize the Bahamian education product and thus provide ourselves a resource-rich talent pool for the future success of our organizations and our industry. By aligning these efforts with your organization's goals, it may provide building blocks from which your organizations can build a dynamic, capable, and motivated workforce that drives long-term success for both your organizations and our industry. Absent effective change in our education product, our industry will have no other option but to go to the government, hat in hand, seeking a liberalization of the Bahamian immigration policy to allow more work permits for our industry. Trust me, this will be a much easier conversation to have if we as an industry can demonstrate that we have skin in the game, that we have provided some tangible assistance in the efforts to resolve the problems our education system faces. In either case, our industry needs to fundamentally rethink how we acquire and leverage our available talent. We should also strive to be known as the jurisdiction that exists on the cutting edge of creativity and innovation. Expanding our product offering and having a culture of creativity and innovation will assist in driving growth. To be creative, we must be prepared to make mistakes. Our jurisdiction has already demonstrated bold and innovative action in this regard in the digital asset space. The Bahamas was among the first countries to implement comprehensive regulations for digital assets and registered exchanges with the introduction of the Digital Assets and Registered Exchange DARE Act in 2020. In 2024, recognizing the fast-paced development in this sector, the Bahamas repealed and replaced the original DARE Act with an enhanced version to stay at the forefront of innovation and maintain its leadership in the digital asset space. Despite the high-profile collapse of FTX, which began unfolding in 2022, as you will see from the graph, the number of registrants under the Act continues to grow. We should be developing innovative products which integrate digital assets into our structures and product offerings and begin leveraging the Bahamas' leading role in this space. It is clear that the financial services sector has reached a critical inflection point. It is crucial for all stakeholders, including the government, to recognize the urgency of the situation. If we are to revive and grow the industry, we must take deliberate and strategic action. Our services need to be world-class. Our offerings must deliver practical, innovative solutions, and our policies must foster competitiveness and sustainable development. The secrecy and tax advantages that once fueled the sector's growth are no longer available. To remain competitive in a global economy where the financial services are accessible with the click of a button, we must offer compelling, creative solutions to our clients. The question then is, what will we as an industry do? Will we shrink in the face of the challenges that confront us, or will we rise to the occasion and move forward? Because going back is not an option, and standing still is simply not enough. We must develop a culture of innovation so that we can see our industry not as it is now, but how it could be. We ignore the need to innovate at our peril. At its core, being innovative is about taking bold, aggressive action that disrupts the status quo and leads to meaningful change. I am prepared to meet those challenges, and each of us must ask ourselves if we are likewise prepared. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. John Wilson, for your presentation this afternoon. We just have a small token for you, token of appreciation, we'll call it.
Thank you. Was this a Bulgari watch?
Even better.